Hello, and you're very welcome to today's webinar. We hope you're keeping safe and well. Today, we turn our attention to an increasingly important issue in Irish agriculture, the carbon footprint of our tillage sector. And as global and local markets demand more sustainable food production, the way we grow our cereals and other crops is coming under closer scrutiny. And joining us today to shed light on this important topic is Dr. Donal O'Brien from Teagasc, who's a research officer in environment, soils, and land use. Good morning, Donal. How are you today?
Good morning. Good, thanks, Mark.
Great. You're very welcome to the webinar today. And Shay Phelan, who's a tillage specialist with Teagasc, is joining us today as well to assist with questions later on. Shay, how are you today?
Good, Mark, and yourself?
Great, great. Yes, the sun is shining in the west, so we can't complain. I think it's going to be a hot one today. There's a lot of hay knocked around the place as well,
I
so
think so, yeah.
I'd say it'll be a cloud of pollen over Ireland over the next 2 days by the looks of things. Shay, you have an important event happening next week. Is that right?
Yeah, Mark, we have our biannual open day here. So our Crops and Technology open day is on here next Wednesday, the 25th. And as well as looking at or showcasing all the research that our research officers do here in terms of the trials, we also have machinery demos as well. So we're looking at sprayer technology this year, specifically some of the new technology that's coming out on machines now in terms of green on brown spraying and green on green spraying. So you're looking at spraying weeds, spot spraying weeds using cameras on booms to try and identify weeds in crops. And we also have demos then in terms of horticulture, and the one I'm involved in is potatoes. So we're looking at new techniques for desiccating potatoes. And we have two new machines that have never been used in Ireland before, one that pulls columns and another one that electrocutes crops to desiccate them. So a lot to be seen here in Oak Park next Wednesday, please God.
Sounds fascinating, and lots of technology there, and that's all happening in Oak Park in County Carlow, and I'm sure of interest to anyone with any connection to tillage. Any particular audiences that you'd like to see there? I think it would be worth.
I think it's open to everybody, to be honest with you. I mean, there's a lot, as you say, there's a lot of technology on here, but I think there's also quite a bit of research here. And the research will look at not just our crops research, but soils, forestry. So there's a lot of different areas that we can look at as well.
Great. Okay, thanks for that, Shay. And we'll talk to you a little later on with questions. If you have a question that you'd like us to discuss this morning, please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen, and we'll try and get to as many of those as possible. So, Donal, sorry to distract from you're our main star this morning, and I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of that important event, given that today's topic is tillage. Could you tell us a little bit about your own background? You're no stranger to the webinar.
Yeah, I suppose a while since I did the last one, but yeah, I guess I'm a research officer in the environment side and the land use side. And yeah, I guess a lot of work done on modeling of different farming systems, life cycle analysis, and looking at the sustainability of them, I guess, from an environment, principally an environment side. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. So I know you've some interesting numbers to share with us this morning. So I'll ask you to share your screen with us, and just while you're doing that, to remind everybody that today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on the Teagasc YouTube channel, as well as podcasts, and we'll have a copy of Donal's presentation as well on the website. So Donal, whenever you're ready, we can share that screen. It is event season in Teagasc at the moment, quite a number of events happening at the moment, and we'll tell you more about those a little later on. So, Donal, that looks great. We'll chat to you in a few minutes.
Yep, thanks, Mark. So I'll talk you through, I guess, the work that we've been doing in Teagasc on the carbon footprinting of tillage products. Just to acknowledge my, I suppose, authors here or presenters as well who contributed. So John Spink and Gary as well. So yeah, just an outline. I guess I'll go through the carbon footprinting approach we have developed for the tillage side. I'll look at initial applications on the knock beg systems experiment near Oak Park. The carbon footprinting on a commercial scale with tier lawn suppliers. and then how to upscale, or I suppose do it through the AgNav sustainability platform that looks at commercial farms as well. So just a background, I guess, the tillage sector in Ireland, it's a I suppose not a major user of land in Ireland. So we're talking about 5% of our agricultural area is in tillage. So roughly between 320 and 340,000 hectares. So it's about 5% compared to an EU average. I think from the Eurostat is around 24%. But even though I guess the area is quite not huge, the output is pretty impressive. So it's around varies from 2.2 to 2.4 million tons. So some of our crop yields are amongst the best or the highest in the world, given I suppose the favorable conditions. Although some years can be challenging with moisture, it's estimated to be worth over 1.3 billion to the economy. So previous reports have looked at the total value of the sector, how many people are employed by the sector, and the number of specialist farmers as well. And then I guess it's a strategically important sector as well. So I guess in the recent times, with the outbreaks of conflicts in different parts of the world, food security has become, I suppose, more important or increasingly important again. Value-added ingredients and feed and bedding is important for livestock as well. For the tillage sector contributes in that respect as well. So maybe bring it to the climate side. So corporate climate policy these days is very much focused around, I guess, net zero and achieving climate neutrality in upcoming decades. So that necessitates large and fairly rapid reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. So targets from different companies vary from 30 to 55% by 2030 and up to 90% by 2050. And looking to reduce greenhouse gas emissions across the entire supply chain. So it's looking at the Scope 1 emissions, so emissions that are occurring directly on site of companies. And as well as that, then looking at the Scope 2, so these are the indirect emissions coming from the generation of power, electricity, and energy. And as well as that then we have the Scope 3 emissions, so the emissions occurring from other inputs that companies use, so the likes of capital inputs, fuel, transport, and agricultural products as well. So the supply chain emissions, I guess the food system is a major driver globally of greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. So global reports would estimate that it's between 21% and 33% of our global emissions, and principally coming from the supply chain. So food retail corporations, I guess, would be a big contributor in this regard. And when you look at the supply chain emissions or the emissions associated with a supermarket, you can see that in this pie chart here that the Scope 1 and even Scope 2 are not major contributors. So that's the on-site and the energy required to run a supermarket. It's mostly the Scope 3 emissions are the big contributor. And I guess farming or agriculture makes a big contribution here. So it's a major share of the product-related emissions under Scope 3, and it has a relatively large or high carbon footprint agricultural products in terms of supermarkets' contribution. So what is a carbon footprint? So a carbon footprint is the total amount of greenhouse gas emissions generated over the life cycle of a product in carbon dioxide equivalents. So carbon footprint is expressed on an output or product basis. So it's the kilos of carbon dioxide equivalent. So that's the greenhouse gas emissions per ton of product. So a ton of oats, ton of cereals, ton of beef, whatever agricultural product you're looking at. So it's quantified with the life cycle assessment methodology. So this is the standard footprinting method. So widely used for carbon, can be used for water, can be used for other footprint metrics as well. So it's the standard method. So several LCAs have been conducted of tillage products, but none have been done at a commercial scale in Ireland. Very few have even been done on research systems. So the industry required, I suppose, a bespoke or tailored model for the tillage sector, a tailored tillage LCA model for native grains, so they could report on their carbon emissions for Ireland. So the tillage LCA that Teagasc developed is following the main guidelines. So it was developed according to the general principles and framework of the International Standard and Standardization Organization for LCA guidelines. So looking at the LCA stages in the ISO, we have defined the goal and scope, inventory analysis, impact assessment, and interpretation are the main phases of life cycle assessment. So that's the general overarching kind of principles. And then there's more specific guidelines for agriculture and food through the UN, the Food and Agriculture Organization's guidelines for the sector. And again, some guidance as well in the Greenhouse Gas Protocol for the agriculture sector as well, which is the corporate accounting standard. So just taking through the steps of LCA. So the Teagasc Tillage LCA, the current model is focused on greenhouse gas emissions. So an LCA focused on greenhouse gas emissions is generally called a carbon footprinting LCA. So the system boundaries from cradle to farm gate, and I'll just go through that briefly in the next slide. What's included, the unit we're looking at is the output, the product of the farm. So tons of cereal, tons of oilseed corrected to a standard moisture content. And the approach we took here then was to allocate all the emissions to the primary product and to look at it, I suppose, over the standard production season as well. So from establishment to the harvesting of a crop. So the scope, I guess, here we're looking at just an illustration of a tillage farm, the activities that occur on farms. So the cultivation, planting, fertilization, harvesting, and the incorporation if it's done on farm. So we're looking at those greenhouse gas emissions and sequestration on farm. And as well as that, then looking at the emissions embedded in the inputs that are purchased on or brought onto the farm as well. So the next part then is the inventory analysis, where we're getting the activity information. So I suppose the farm data, that what's happening on farm. And then the emission factors as well. So we're combining that information, the actual activity with the emission factors to calculate the emissions from different activities. And there's three different levels you can go to. So you have tier 1, 2, and 3. So tier 1 is the most basic, global or default values. We have country-specific figures for some activities as well. And then you have the more complex process-based modeling that I suppose requires more data intensive. That I suppose takes into account a lot more information around the actual real-time, I suppose, activities or environmental conditions as well. So I suppose on the inventory analysis, this is just I suppose a picture here of the initial survey we were working with. So it was an Excel form, Microsoft Excel form, where we were gathering data through this system. So we're gathering the soil type information, cultivation methods, the energy or usage through the number of field passes or tractor passes, fertilizer usage, lime application, again, number of sprays, passes, the harvesting, yield, straw management, and cover cropping as well. So gathering a lot of information here about each crop type on the tillage farm. And I guess where we didn't have information that was required, we filled it in with or filled in the missing data with information from Teagasc and industry sources. So for example, for nutrient contents of different manures where it's not measured on farm, where we're using the Teagasc Green Book. And for energy usage, we were working with coefficients from Teagasc and DEFRA. And then for straw, we were basing it on harvest index and Teagasc information as well, based on the crop yield as well. So this is just kind of a simple illustration of the calculations of how it works. You have the emissions, so you have CO2, nitrous oxide, ammonia, and nitrate are different emissions. You have the activity information, so coming from the grower, from the farm, and then we have the emission factors coming from the research. So combining those to get an emission for each activity. And look, I won't go through all of the different sources here, but this is just an example of the emission factors we're using in the model for nitrous oxide. So we're using a combination of tier 2 country-specific emission factors for the different fertilizer products that are applied on farms. So can compounds have the same general factor, urea, protected urea, again, using the factors that are in the national inventory that are tier 2, and then for other sources where we don't have tier 2 or country-specific data, we're using the national information. So this is a standard default factor of 0.6% of N for crop residues or organic manure. And then we're using default figures as well for indirect sources and nitrous oxide loss as well. So that's where the ammonia and nitro leaching come in to the calculation. So that's just an example on the emission side. And then for sequestration, we're looking at sequestration for straw incorporation. So this is based on a research that was conducted in Teagasc, looking at the carbon sequestration for different for straw yields. So at certain straw yields, there was different levels of carbon sequestration, so kilos of CO2 per hectare. And here we're looking at it across 3 kind of soil types, so sandy, loam, and clay, so light, medium, and heavy type soils, and factoring in the sequestration as well. So then the next part of the LCA is to look at the impact of these different emissions. So these impacts are translated into what are known as potential impacts with characterization factors. So for greenhouse gas emissions or carbon footprinting, we're looking at carbon dioxide equivalents. So it's measuring the global warming potential of a greenhouse gas emission over a 100-year time horizon. So the different greenhouse gas emissions are converted into CO2 equivalents based on their warming potential. So we have 3, I suppose, principal greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. So CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide. And this table just illustrates, I guess, how the factors have changed over time. So this is coming from the latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. So we're using the 2021 figures for CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide. So that gives us a common CO2 figure for the different greenhouse gases that's related to the output of the system. So just, I suppose that's the model, how it was developed, how the LCA works, and what is feeding into it. So we did an initial run of the model using research from NOCBEG. So we looked at a fairly recent, well, maybe it's a few years old now, trial with 4 different crops. So it was winter wheat, winter oilseed rape, winter oats, and winter barley. So winter wheat was grown either continuously or in rotation. So it was using either, so the rotation was using 2 break crops. So we're looking at winter oilseed rape and winter oats, and as well as that, looking at 2 cultivation methods. So in the systems experiment, I guess it was looking at the impact of these treatments were having on yield, production performance, and the economics as well, I guess. And we, when we did the LCA in it, we ran the information from the trial through our model and corrected it then for the standard moisture contents for the different crops here. So this is the output for the NOCBEG, so the simple output average across the different systems. So here we have the carbon footprint of the different grain crops averaged over the period. It's kilos of CO2 equivalent per ton of grain. So we have it here for winter wheat, winter oats, and winter barley. So all coming in under 200 kilos of CO2 equivalent per ton for the cereal crops. And then for winter oilseed rape, it was around the 350 mark. So just a breakdown of the carbon footprint by gas for the crops grown in NOCBEG. So here we have a graph here showing the percentage breakdown for carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane. So the principal contributors. to the greenhouse gas emissions or the emissions profile for the different crops. So you can see here, it's really dominated by carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, with methane making a very minor contribution to the carbon footprints of tillage crops. So this is here is just another way of doing the emissions profile or giving the breakdown of the carbon footprint. So by source, so for fertilizer manufacture, fertilizer application. So there are the green and yellow colors here. So I suppose the bottom and the second last column part of the chart. So you can see the crops here on the horizontal axis. And yeah, its fertilizer manufacturing application really dominated the footprint of the cereal and the oilseed rape crops as well, with energy use and crop residues making up most of the remainder. So looking at, I suppose, the treatments or the research experiment, so the average yield of the winter wheat, so looking at effective rotation, so we have the average yield here, so averaged across the period, so they were pretty high yielding crops of wheat across the periods. So you can see here that the rotation outperformed the continuous wheat by about 18%, so about 1.7 tons per hectare, giving you a yield benefit from growing winter wheat in rotation compared to continuous growing of winter wheat. And that translated then into a 17% decrease numerically compared to continuous systems. So you can see here the benefits of rotation from a carbon footprinting point of view. So I suppose that's the example, initial trial run of the model through the knockbeg research experiments. So one systems trial there. So then we working with Teagasc, thanks to Teagasc, we developed, or we did a carbon footprinting of their grain growers. So the Tillage LCA of Teagasc grain was the first commercial scale Tillage LCA. It represents the specialist tillage grain growers. So data was collected on 4% of the growers, so 48 growers in total, who had a total combined area of 11,500 hectares, and the growing season we were looking at was the 2021-2022 growing season. So looking at several crops, so with major, I suppose, volumes in the crops listed here, so that the main cereals, spring and winter, oilseed rape, and spring beans as well. And just an illustration or a map there, I guess, of where the majority of tillage is located in Ireland as well. So mostly around the southeast, south, I guess, where most of the tillage growers are located. So this is just, I guess, a table of the technical characteristics of the growers. So I guess yield and fertilizer are two, I suppose, major inputs, are two major factors here to look at. So I've just listed out here by the different crops. So the mean fertilizer rates, the range, the yields, and the range again. So again, I won't go through it all in detail, but I guess the yields again were above average for many of the crops, are slightly below the national average, but they were all quite high, and the season we looked at as well was favorable for grain growing or crop production. And the fertilizer rates were around the average recommended rates, or slightly above for some crops, with I suppose beans being the crop that required or that had no fertilizer application. So this is the outputs, I guess, of the Teagasc, the gross carbon footprint for the different crop types. So are the main crop types. So this is a box plot of the carbon footprints. So it's looking at, I suppose, here we have, I guess, the boxes show. So the color boxes here represent the first and the third quartile of the sample. So the carbon footprints from those growers. Then we have the tails. So this represents the minimum and maximum. So it's from the tails are from the min to the max, and then the dots represent outside the tails represent growers that are outliers. So you can see that most of the carbon footprints for the crops averaged around the 200 mark, so ranging from 170 to around 300 was kind of the range we were looking at here, a bit below 300. And then for oilseed rape, again, it was coming out higher than the cereal crops, and for the beans as well. And I guess maybe in the previous slide, I should have mentioned, shown or highlighted that the yields were lower for oilseed rape, but the end fertilizer application was similar. So that was driving a higher footprint there. So again, this is what contributes to the gross carbon footprint of the different grains that were grown by tiered on suppliers. So I have it here done out by crop type again here on the horizontal axis and the carbon footprint on the vertical axis. And it's broken down by source again. So fertilizer application and manufacturer was the main contributor for most of the crops except for spring beans. So for spring beans, diesel production use and limestone or lime application and manufacture were important contributors for those two crops, for that crop. So just looking at what was driving or what the gross carbon footprint was sensitive to for the different crops. So looking at the crops together, so the oats, wheat, barley, beans, and oilseed rape, so aggregating them together. I have here the baseline carbon footprint for each crop type. And then looking at the impact if we looked at it using a different product unit or a different product or different functional unit as it's known in LCA, so on an energy basis. You can see that the carbon footprints are, for oilseed rape is much closer to the cereal crops and beans in this case because of the, I suppose, higher energy concentration of the oilseed rapes. And then looking at using different emission factors. So for fertilizer application, using the default tier 1 factor, it increases the carbon footprint figures for cereals and oilseed rape, but has no impact for beans. For fertilizer production, switching from or looking at plants with higher emissions, so an Asian plant, it increased the carbon footprint against for the cereal crops and oilseed rape again, but had little or no impact again for beans. So you can see what factors are most, or what's the carbon footprint is most sensitive to in this example. So looking at carbon sequestration on farm and looking at it through strong cooperation, there was a number of growers who looked at using strong cooperation, particularly for oats and for oilseed rape. So they were the primary crops where straw was incorporated. So that gave a benefit then in terms of soil carbon, so increasing the carbon stocks or carbon content of the soils for soil carbon when straw was incorporated for oats. And that was contributing then to the negative carbon figure here. So reduction or decrease, a potential decrease of 170 kilos per ton for spring oats, and then around 76 for oilseed rape. So whereas the other crops then, where I suppose straw was not incorporated, so most growers either removed or sold the straw, then there wasn't really a benefit from sequestration on those crops. So this was then fed in to work out the net carbon footprint. So this is again a box plot again, where the boxes show, the color boxes show the interquartile range. So the first and third quartile, and then you have the tails showing the min and the maximum. So it's pretty similar, I guess, the gross carbon footprint for a number of crops, except the oats, where it brought down the mean or the median figures closer to net zero. So a net footprint of around 37 or 38 for oats, and for winter oats as well. But there was still quite a range, I guess, for winter oats. And then for some crops like winter wheat, or for some growers where they were doing strong crop rotation, it was bringing their carbon footprint down to close to net zero as well. So after doing this work with Teagasc, we looked, I guess, at how the carbon footprint of Irish tillage performs internationally. So internationally, we did a comparison using the Global Feed Lifecycle Assessment Institute database. So they have a database published of the environmental impacts of different crops and different feed ingredients. So they published a second version of that database in 2023. So the crop LCA, the default or the standard approach that they use. So I guess it's similar to what we have been doing. So it's a cradle to farm gate approach. So looking at the on-farm emissions, not sequestration. It looks at emissions like only. It's looking at the embedded emissions as well. The functional unit is a ton of product, dried product, allocation method, economic. So they attribute some of the emissions to the co-products, and then they use default emission factors, so global tier 1 emission factors for greenhouse gas emissions. The impact assessment they use, or that is used in the GFLI, the Global Feed Lifecycle Assessment database, is the recipe method. So they're using CO2 conversion factors with the 100-year global warming potential approach. So here, just pulling out the information from the database and including the tier lawn study for the 2021-22 growing season. You have the carbon footprint of barley grain here per ton of products, dried barley grain. So with drying included and added to the tier lawn carbon number as well. You can see that Ireland performs quite well. So Ireland is near the end or near the bottom of the range, so it has a low carbon footprint in GFLI. And then when we looked at the tier lawn and using our country-specific factors as well, it's bringing the carbon footprint down to, I guess, a very low figure internationally or globally, so just around the 220, 230 mark. So doing it again, or looking at for another cereals, or looking at oats this time. Again, the picture was similar, kind of mirrored the barley. So Irish oats in the GFLI with their tier 1 approach was coming out quite well. So again, near the bottom of the range compared to other countries like Canada, US, and Spain. So I guess down to maybe favorable yields and conditions, I suppose, resulting in a low footprint for Irish oats, and tier land again for that season doing very, very well. So then looking at how to upscale, I suppose, the Teagasc Tillage LCA. So going, I guess, from the commercial scale work that was done with that sample of growers and scaling it up through, I guess, the sustainability digital platforms, so AgNav. So it's a key pillar as part of the climate strategy in Teagasc. So incorporating tillage model is part of the plan for the sustainability digital platform, and is currently what we're working on, or have been working on in the recent times. So the AgNav platform, or the AgNav, I guess it's a collaboration, or has been co-developed by Teagasc with ICBF and Borbia. So it's using the collective power of the 3 agencies to bring together sustainability information to help the sector meet its climate targets, and it's being supported as well by the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. So it's an online digital platform to support farmers, I suppose, use the information that is available or that is already being supplied, and to give them information on their climate impact and carbon numbers. So we're trying to move away, or we are moving away from the spreadsheet approach where we gather the data on farm. So with a recorder, for the growers in the previous commercial scale study to move towards the AgNav system. So putting that survey basically into the AgNav through a streamlined format, so easy to use, easy to fill in, or as easy as possible to try and take, I suppose, the hardship out of filling in data. So it's an online system that will be demoed or displayed at the open day on Wednesday. So we're looking at phasing the incorporation of the Tillage LCA into AgNav. So we're nearly getting towards the end of phase one. So phase one, it's about, I guess, getting the tillage survey into AgNav. So we've incorporated the survey into the digital tool with ICBF and Borbia, and we're working as well, or have the model as well incorporated into it as well, and looking at the outputs of the model and doing the testing or finalizing the testing on that as well. So phase one will give you carbon footprints like I showed there for different crop types per ton of product, or potentially on a ton of product basis. So what is required in this, you need your DAFM information. You'll also need your assurance or auditing body number as well. And feeding that information into the survey will be run into the model that will generate carbon numbers and feedback to the grower, who can feed it back to their merchant if they so wish to do so. And then phase two is looking at, I suppose, decision support or the forecaster feature. So how to include straw incorporation and possibly other mitigation technologies like organic amendments as well, and what impact they have on the emissions or carbon footprint and carbon sequestration, but by crop type. Again, the same framework or same structure. So just for those who are not familiar with AgNav, you can access it through the online. So you can join up through the Signpost Advisory Program, or for those part of faster sustainability programs, they can join or log on to the system through those programs. So I guess just finally then maybe kind of get close to wrapping up. The Teagasc Tillage LCA, I guess it's just important to point out a few areas maybe where there's some limitations on the models. So I guess it's a mixture of default, so tier 1 emission factors and country-specific emission factors. So based on Teagasc research, so we're, I suppose, using tier 1 factors for some emission sources. So crop residues, lime, organic amendments. So trying, I guess, or the plan is to move away from tier 1 over time to use more country-specific emissions data or factors. And we're unable at the moment, or the tool is currently unable to determine the yield or carbon sequestration for cover crops on farms. So it's an area that we'll be doing research around as well. Just on the commercial scale tillage LCA, then it's just, I guess, important to point out some obvious things, that it's just one. We only looked at one production season, so it'd be better to maybe to look at it over a number of seasons, and it was focused on a single impact, so carbon footprinting. It's limited to specialist farmers, and it wasn't representative of the whole country. So looking at it at a broader scale through a nationally representative survey, possibly the National Farm Survey might be an option there. So just in summary then, I guess, Irish tillage products perform very, very well in terms of their carbon footprint. So looking at the gross Greek carbon footprint figures in the Global Feed Life Cycle Assessment Institute database, it's the Irish figures are at the lower end of the range. The carbon footprints of cereals and oilseed rapeseed are, as I said a number of times, are driven mostly by fertilizer and the yield of the product, or the crop, sorry. And for legumes like beans, I suppose the emissions profile is different. So diesel and lime application were more important for this crop type. So then on the net figure, if you're bringing in straw incorporation, depending then on how it's considered, you potentially can bring the carbon footprint of grain So the likes of oats down to net zero, or even giving negative carbon footprint figures. But it's just, I guess, important to bear in mind that carbon sequestration is temporary, although it does last, I suppose, can last for significant times, up to 20 years. And as well as that, I guess carbon sequestration in soil is reversible. So carbon that can be captured, organic carbon or organic matter can be lost as well. And yeah, there is potential options or potential ways to improve the carbon footprint further. So the climate mitigation technologies mentioned or that have been described in the Teagasc marginal abatement cost curve and through the Signpost program as well. So factoring covering crops is obviously a priority for the tillage, precision agriculture, and possibly landscape features as well. Bringing the land information would be important as well. Yep, so the next steps are to launch the AgNav Tillage LCA and demo it at the Crops Open Day next Wednesday, starting at 10 o'clock, I think, and then to enhance the Tillage LCA model over time as well to bring in, I suppose, more mitigation technologies through the forecast feature in the tool. So just to say thank you again to Ireland for funding and supporting this work through the development of the model in the commercial scale study. Yeah, and to acknowledge, I suppose, former farm manager in Oak Park as well on the data collation side, and as well as that Teagasc in supporting the model refinement. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Donal. That was a lot of information you went through there, and as I said earlier on, that presentation will be available for people to review some of the figures that you've presented there. So thank you, Donal. The just in relation to those international comparisons there, and I see Ireland is very much on it's the lowest on the oats, the carbon footprint of oats. What would you say is what's the main difference there between, I see Spain is on the higher end and Italy and then Ireland is on the lower end. What are the significant differences there between those production systems, or is it climate, or what is the main driver there?
Yeah, so looking at the GFLI, I guess we're looking at the crop production statistics from 2021, I think is the year they use. So looking at their basic tier 1 approach, Ireland came out at the bottom for that, and using the refined emission factors came out very well as well. So yeah, I guess it's a combination maybe of climate. So maybe climate's favorable for high yields in Ireland for tillage products or tillage crops. And we're looking at a dry matter, per ton of dry matter as well. Yeah, so I think the yields, favorable yields, and probably weather conditions, maybe drier climates, maybe it's more difficult and to get low footprints like we have here.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting. Like a lot of the direction of travel with climatic conditions, the Ireland is becoming a very favorable and becoming more favorable for food production, no matter which way you look at it. Um, you talked about that ambition of carbon neutrality within the sector. How achievable do you see that being, or what sort of the time frames do you think they're realistic?
Yes, I suppose on the net zero climate neutrality, it is, I guess, a target, isn't it, for many different companies, corporations, and obviously Ireland as a country as well. It's our national targets is to get towards climate neutrality by 2050, and the food system is part of that as well. So you would have to say tillage is in quite a good position as the carbon footprint and even the National Farm Survey, when you look at the emissions per hectare, is quite low. And when you can bring in the likes of strong corporation and hopefully cover cropping and other technologies, it does seem very feasible, or pretty feasible to get to net zero through the adoption of those technologies or those practices on farm. I guess maybe to look at the economic and cost side of it, or what are the barriers to the adoption of those practices would be, I guess, important to look at there, which I know is being done as well.
Great. Shay, I know you and your team are doing a lot of work in this whole space. What advice are you offering farmers, tillage farmers, to reduce their carbon footprint?
Yeah, Mark, we are, and I suppose a lot of the measures that Donal has outlined there, probably on one that I suppose is getting a lot of traction lately with some of the schemes going around are the use of cover crops as well. So in terms of trapping a lot of that nutrition and nitrogen that's in the soils, and returning carbon back to the soil as well. So that's something that certainly, as a tillage industry, I think is getting a lot of traction at the moment. And we see in the new water EIP, there's a lot of interest from tillage farmers in taking up that EIP because of that measure, I suppose, and among others. But I think cover crops are something that really have gained a footprint here over the last number of years, or foothold, should I say, over the last number of years, and they're becoming more and more important on tillage farms.
Great. Some interesting questions coming through there, Shay, on our Q&A there, and please do feel free to use the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen there if you have any questions you'd
Yeah,
like to go to Donal
there
or
are.
Shay.
And start off with the first one here, Mark. Is the maintenance of field boundaries, margins, and the water course buffer zones, is that taking into account in the modelling, Donal?
Is the maintenance of the field boundaries, water
The
courses.
margins, yeah, and the maintenance of buffer zones, is that taken into account in terms of calculating the carbon footprint?
So we have the mapped out area for the agricultural area, but like we wouldn't be factoring any carbon storage or sequestration for those margins or areas of the farm in the model now.
Right, okay. Second question here relates to slide 28, I think it is, where you were looking at the what contributes to the carbon footprint. And for the nitrous oxide reading, are vehicles using AdBlue? And if yes, how would this change if they're not using it?
So the use of AdBlue, how does that contribute to the mitigation, is it, of the carbon
Yeah, I think
number?
in
Is it?
terms of reducing the amount of diesel use and the emissions from diesel.
Yeah, so yeah, I probably skipped through quickly, but I guess we're calculating the fuel usage based on the number of tractor passes using, I suppose, book values from Teagasc and the UK. So like we're only using, I guess, those values, and I don't know if AdBlue is included in those. I don't think it is.
Right, okay. Question here about the LCA. What percentage of tillage farmers measure their carbon footprint? I'm not sure whether you can answer that or not. And is there interest engaging with carbon credit markets? And finally, third part of the same question, can AgNav be functional for this in terms of MRV?
Okay, so I might go with the last part of the question first. So I think yes, that for MRV, it is the purpose of AgNav that to be able to monitor, measure, and report the emissions on farm and tillage farms and the carbon sequestration as well. So that is the plan to make it usable for carbon farming. The first part, what was the first part about tillage farmers being able to do
How
carbon
many
numbers?
are measuring the carbon footprint?
I couldn't give you. I wouldn't know I wouldn't know that.
And
I would be
I
guessing it
suppose the
would
other
be a
one,
small number.
yeah. And I suppose the other one that gains an interest in at some events that we go to is the whole area of carbon credit markets. Is that something is it still pie in the sky? Is it a live market, or what do you think is going to happen in that space?
Yeah, I guess there is a lot of talk about carbon markets, all right, and it is space I've been involved in a bit on the livestock side or the mixed livestock sector. And yeah, I guess since the emergence of the European Carbon Farming Framework or the CRCF and the national program, I guess it's just, I suppose it's still a bit unclear exactly how that's going to develop. I know there is programs there involved, but the sums or the amounts farmers on the tillage side are getting for carbon farming practices, shall we call them? They're not huge figures. It's quite small sums, I think,
Yeah,
on
yeah,
some schemes in France and the UK.
yeah. An interesting question here from Andy Doyle. What would happen to the relative crop numbers if your functional unit use both energy and protein content, akin say like milk solids in terms of milk, would it make much difference, do you think?
Well, yeah, again, I know I ran through a lot of figures there in the presentation, and there's actually an awful lot more in the background as well. I'm sure you know, Shay, but yeah, like even looking at the ISIL rep example, I think John Spink could have mentioned this before. Like when you look at it on an energy basis and compare it to the cereals or beans, like it's quite similar. And if you look at it even on a net basis, there's no real difference between them. Yeah, so on a protein basis, then I guess would it even be more favorable? What do you think, Shay, for the ISIL rep?
You'd imagine it probably should be.
Yeah, yeah.
And actually, while we're on that, it's something that I get asked quite a bit at events as well in terms of the carbon footprint of Irish grain, native grain versus imported grain. Is that something that should be taken into account, say, when the likes of Tier Lawn or any other company use native grains to feed animals or livestock in
Yeah,
Irish production systems? Is that something that probably could or should be used?
Yeah, well, I guess it's part of what is being done in AgNav is to factor in that what is being used through the native grains. I guess just getting that information on where to feed, the provenance and origin of is maybe a bit challenging sometimes.
Yeah.
I suppose at
Uh,
the moment, Shay, though, the
Sorry,
actual
Mark. Yeah.
the carbon footprint associated with any imported grain is assigned to that particular country, though, isn't it? It's
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's
so I
important to
suppose
make that point, Mark, you know?
it adds that bit of complication to it, but it's a really good point, though. If you're
Yeah.
looking at a globally sustainable system that stands up, yes, absolutely,
Yeah.
that is a fair point that you make.
Exactly that. And another question I have here from Phelan, Donal, you mentioned the drawback at looking at only one growing system, one season, should I say. Are there plans to look at the impacts of straw and cooperation over a longer period of time?
So I guess that's where I guess AgNav will come in, that growers can look at their footprint over a number of years and potentially even go back to previous years and enter in information if they have it and look at how the footprint has changed over time. And yeah, to bring in strong cooperation as well. That would be good too. I guess when did it, I suppose, how long have growers been doing it or adopting this practice? Maybe on the outside it's been adopted for a number of years, but I guess for straw, for barley and other crops, probably not so much.
And I suppose a final question from me here for the moment, anyway, Donald, in terms of that sort of calculation, is establishment system, is that something that we need to look at more closely in terms of its carbon footprint, or is it mainly down to your overall yield at the end of the day that dilutes down that carbon footprint?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah, and it's one I think that comes up again and again. Looking at the work done in Oak Park, or I think it was Oak Park, a number of years back, they looked at spring barley production systems, I think. They looked at two crop establishment systems, so the common plow-based one and a min-till system, and they measured the CO2 and they measured the nitrous oxide, I think, with the chamber technique, and they found no real difference between the carbon emissions for min-till or plowing. So if there's no difference in the emissions, and they did notice that the productivity of the min-till was below the plow-based system, then the footprint is probably going to be, slightly lower for plow-based or no difference.
Okay, thanks,
Suppose
Phil.
we have to look at the
But yeah,
broader.
just sorry, I think there probably is a need even maybe to relook at that, because I think the study I'm talking about now is maybe 2004 or 5 when they did that work.
Yeah, yeah, exactly that.
I guess we
Thanks,
need to
Donald.
look at the broader dividends as well of ploughing or min-till versus ploughing as well beyond carbon as well. Just interested to know, Shay, you're dealing with farmers on a daily basis on this topic. How are farmers responding? What's the general feeling around the tools and technologies that are being offered to them to
I
reduce their carbon footprint?
Yeah, I think it's broadly positive, Mark. albeit I suppose a lot of people are kind of trying to get their a proper understanding of what this all means for them and their business. And that's why I asked the question about the imported grains versus the native grains. I mean, that's something that keeps coming up time and time again in terms of questions that we get at Teagasc tillage events in terms of, can we not market our grain as being, potentially more carbon friendly or
Mhm.
environmentally friendly than grain coming from South America, where they're tearing down rainforests per se. So that's something I think that a lot of farmers are trying to get to grips with. Yes, they're in general positively disposed towards measuring their own carbon footprint and having a figure that they can then use. So I think it's baby steps at the moment for a lot of tillage farmers, but I think broadly are, and they are broadly positive for the whole idea.
Yeah, and I think there was a question there about labeling of food and how far away are we from that? And I do think when we get to that sort of point that we can start to really boast the differences there. And Donal, you've presented the figures with cereals, and look, we have also a very positive story in relation to the milk and beef production, the carbon emissions per kilogram of product there as well. Shay, your your hands raised there, whether it's intentional
Oh,
or
sorry,
not.
I don't know what happened there. Don't know what happened there.
No problem at all. We're coming close to the end there, Donal. Before we, wrap up, what current research is happening in this area, or what sort of future direction are you hoping to go with this research?
Yeah, I guess yeah, I said it there towards the end. It's I guess to move towards more specific emissions data for some of the sources we're using. So crop residues, lime, even organic materials, I guess, to make it more specific again to Ireland. And as well as that, then to factor in more of the mitigation technologies that Shay mentioned there, like the cover cropping and more, as part of a forecaster tool in AgNav, where farmers or growers can see what impact different decisions have on their climate number and potentially other, I suppose, sustainability metrics as well into the future.
What about that point that was made earlier on there about looking at the beyond the footprint of the crop and actually looking at that broader farm level type, footprint? Is that something that's being considered? That it's not just the crop taken in isolation. I know with tillage or with livestock farms, there is they're looking at the field margins that rather than just the actual footprint of the crop. Maybe I'm wrong on that now, but how is that incorporated into your calculations?
Yeah, so I guess there is a maybe more longer term plan to look at the system or the whole farm together, well, bring the different enterprise together maybe, uh,
Mhm,
so farmers can see how their beef, tillage, and other enterprises, I suppose, interact.
mhm.
And yeah, to bring in, I guess, the landscape features, the field margins as well into the tillage as well as the livestock, and to get, I suppose, that land information or I suppose exact land information required to do that kind of modeling.
Yes, really, really important. And of course, looking at that interaction and that cooperation between tillage and livestock farms, what are the benefits there? I think would be very interesting to look at, and even those mixed operations that I know, particularly within the organic sector, is being promoted. Donal, thanks so much for preparing your presentation and joining us today. Shay, thanks for helping with questions. So until next week, where we'll have Lawrence Chalou joining us, enjoy the fine weather, and hopefully we'll have lots of hay made over the next 24 hours. So thanks again, and stay safe, and we'll see you next Friday.